We're live, so you better stop saying all those terrible things about people, Robert.
Damn it. I was only halfway through my list.
Oh, um, this morning I was watching a so-called news program
Mm.
in this morning, and they had on an animal psychic, and her claim to
Ah,
fame is that she'd been working with Paris Hilton's dogs. I mean,
yes.
God, can you believe people put this stuff on? Hello, YouTube. Welcome. We just let this run for a minute or so while people can come in. Oh, I've scared YouTube off. Goodbye, YouTube. And then we'll put the countdown on. Actually, maybe I'll take the overlay down. Just hello, who's already in the house? Hello, YouTube. Nice to see you. We're just letting this sort of run for a minute before we run the countdown, just to let people find their way in, because it does take a little while. The notifications are very, very sketchy. I just got a notification from Twitch, so obviously the Twitch notification has worked, but I haven't had a notification from YouTube or anything yet.
At least one of them's working.
I hope you've got a coffee, Rob,
I've just finished mine.
or a cup of tea. Oh,
Yeah.
this is where you need a butler. You need someone to say,
Yeah.
come on, bring me some more. I'm trying to.
Multiple cups.
I'm also trying, Rob, to highlight my the bird in screen, which you will no doubt know why I have picked that today
Mm.
as my backdrop. All right, let's run the countdown. If people are late, they're late. I don't really care. And the countdown just lets me do easy to edit off the front bit, Rob. So
Exactly.
there we are. G'day, bird nerds. I'm Grant. I'm from the Bird Emergency. I'm a bird nerd. Oh, forgive me for my odd angles today. I'm just trying to make sure that you can see the bird in question, and we're going to talk about why that's there. But welcome to the first of the Sunday sessions, and the Sunday sessions are where we get to relax a bit, have a cuppa, and meet someone to talk about conservation and biodiversity and just stuff generally. So it's a lot more low key than we normally do, even though I'm generally running a show that's so low key that if I bent back any further, we'd fall over. But Rob Ashworth, welcome back to the Bird Emergency. For
Thank
those of you,
you.
it's nice to see you, Rob, on a Sunday.
Yeah,
How's
thanks for having me.
how's your part of Melbourne? You're not flooded, are you?
Oh no, thankfully not. No, I'm out in Sunbury, so we are quite a ways from any of the major flooding that's happening at the moment. Thank goodness. There's a few of the creeks around are running pretty full at the moment, but yeah, thankfully no major issues out my way.
Now, if you haven't met Robert before, like if you haven't been watching every video that goes up on the Bird Emergency or tuning into the podcast, this little piece of artwork might give you an idea. Rob, how's your rumpuary project going?
To tell you the truth, it's been a pretty manic couple of weeks, so it's been a struggle to keep as detailed a watch on it as I would have probably have liked when we were last talking. So far, it's tracking along pretty well. I've gotten a few more observations that people have sent in about red rump parrots nesting for this season, which is always exciting. I'll be going out with a bit of luck, just on a few little walks myself, just to try and track down a few of the ones that are nesting around or potentially nesting around Melbourne in different parks and things like that. But yeah, if any of your listeners know of or have seen any red rump parrots nesting in hollows or artificial structures or nest boxes, if you could let me know using the handy little survey that's included in that website, that would be absolutely amazing. We're running research to pretty much figure out what a good red rump hollow looks like and how we can then use that information to improve habitat in urban areas.
And there's an easy link for you to find the project. For those of you that are unaware, what Robert is doing is trying to locate all the known hollows that the red rump parrots nest in, be it currently or at any time in memory going back. So if you grew up somewhere and you remember red rump parrots nesting somewhere, even if that place is gone, go and fill in the survey and let Robert know. I'll pop that up a little bit later too, so people can follow it up. Rob, I think I told you when we were talking about Rumpuary that I have some red rumps generally around my place, and you live a little bit further out from Melbourne, but on the same train line and the same major roads. So we're kind of linked. We're kind of close, but I haven't seen the red rumps.
Interesting.
Yeah, I haven't seen. I did see one weeks ago, but where they usually feed, where they usually hang out, the trees they're usually in, no, haven't seen them at all.
That's interesting. I mean, I don't know them to be as dependent on nesting in the exact same location as some species are. So it's possible, well, with a bit of luck, it's just simply they're somewhere slightly different for this particular season. But it's interesting if you've seen them fairly consistently that they're not around at the moment. So it'd be nice to know what's going on there.
And all of the grasses that I usually see them feeding on, like they particularly like that Poa annua in the nature strips and the median strips, but also they'll have a crack at the dandelions and the capeweed and whatnot. Now that's all those seed heads are forming, so this is exactly when I usually see them. But it's a bit of a shame that family group, or the couple of family groups that I usually see, aren't there. Now, Rob, let me just invite people to the idea today on a Sunday session is we don't have a set subject. So we're going to talk about conservation, birds, biodiversity, all of the challenges that we're facing, education even, because Rob's doing his masters. So if there's anything you want to contribute, comment you want to make or anything, just do it, whichever platform you're in. Get on the comments and we'll see it. Rob, you've just been away on a field trip.
Yes, I had 2 weeks in rural Queensland, doing some surveys up there. So that was, thankfully it wasn't too hot. It's been a while since I've dealt with Queensland heat, so I'm glad it wasn't right in the middle of summer.
So tell us what a survey for the I know because sometimes you can't talk about the projects until all the work is done and things are published and whatnot. But what I think people often like to know about or like to understand is what what do you actually do when you're doing a survey in this project that you've just done, the
Mm.
field work you've just been out on? What, how do you collect the data? Like what do you use, and what are you actually collecting?
Mm. So it's very project specific, really. So initially, when you're sort of first starting out, and you've got a project, and you know what the, the general plan is for what is being developed, and you have the location. You start off with using a bunch of desktop search tools that the state and federal government compile and maintain. And it basically helps you pull together a list of potential threatened species or threatened ecological communities that could be existing in that location. And then the next step would be to go out and collect or perform a number of surveys based on that list to basically ground truth, or to figure out whether or not those species or communities are in fact present, and if they are, then what needs to be done to either avoid them or mitigate
Okay,
the impacts.
let me sort of ask a couple of questions to maybe make it easier for people to understand if they're coming into this
Mm.
situation cold. Let's just say that you're looking for there's a development that maybe want to build uh, a bunch of new factories and put some new roads into an area, right
Mhm.
on the outskirts of a town, but that area has a particularly rare, amazing polka dot and pink orchid
Yeah.
that grows there. Okay, and orchid, of course, little plant growing up out of the grass. Now, do you go in and then mark out a series of grids? Like, do you try and survey the whole area, or depending on how big it is, do you go and maybe do some 10 meter or 100 meter by 100 meter squares, and then within that, do you lay down other grids so that you might only be looking at 10 or 15 square meter patches, and
Mm.
identifying every plant and then cataloging that? So that's part one. And
Mm.
then if you find something significant, do you do something like a GIS location? I mean, do you have those survey poles that talk to the satellites so that they can tell exactly where the plant is? Like, what's the methodology and how?
It's a good question, and a lot of it again is very species dependent. So the government will actually have guidelines for each individual threatened species as to the protocol that you need to follow. So for something like an orchid, let's say, if it's a massive, massive, massive area, it's going to be very, very difficult to physically walk, because that's what we're essentially doing. We'd be walking. It's You can't really survey little orchids from a car, up and down that massive area to try and find every single individual. So it's potentially we'd be surveying a subset. So just a certain few areas scattered throughout the project, and to try and get an estimate of the population. Sometimes these species might be only found within a particular ecological community. So we'd use mapping to so we know where those ecological communities are, and then we'd focus our efforts on just those communities, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But when we're actually on the ground, a lot of the data collection is done using GPS coordinates, and so GIS. And it's actually these days, a lot of it can be just done from your phone. So we've got apps that connect us into to the actual project mapping files, and we can just input some points when we find whatever it is that we're looking for, and any other additional information. And so that tends to be the way that we we sort of go about doing it, to try and make sure that we're covering as much areas where we possibly can, as well as being as accurate as we possibly can.
There we go, Rob. We just got a hello from the Philippines, so I couldn't resist. Did I tell you when we were talking before, either on like live or otherwise, that I absolutely love the Philippines?
I don't think so. No.
I first went there after they had Super Typhoon Yolanda, which
Mm.
basically smashed a whole city called
Yeah.
Tacloban. Um, and when I heard about it, I don't know if this goes through your mind. When I heard about it, because I knew that the Philippines infrastructure is pretty crap, right? And that it's well known that that there's some corruption going there, and I figured that if I sent money to a government relief program or something, that not much of the money would actually make it to anyone.
For sure.
Maybe 20%, 30%,
Yeah.
50%, whatever. And and because a small amount of money goes a long way, I just wanted to find someone, right? Some person that I could help. So I just went on social media, and it was actually, I think it was the first time I'd ever used Instagram,
Yeah.
and and I just went to anywhere where I thought there might be anybody who might know someone or had been affected, and I just said, "Hey, I'm just trying to find someone who got affected by
Yeah.
Cyclone Yolanda, or Super Typhoon, as it was
Yeah.
called there." And I eventually did find someone who, at this stage, was in had been evacuated and was in a relief centre, which was actually a stadium,
Mm.
and their family was being relocated. So I kept in touch, and then when they got relocated, I bought them. They had a extended family had a house in another area of the Philippines, so I bought them some chickens and some timber and a pig and a couple of things,
Mm.
and helped them out. Didn't think too much about it,
Mm.
and then I got this message a few months later saying, "Hey, come and have Christmas with us." So so I thought, okay. So then I worked out how to get there,
Yeah.
and I flew into the Philippines because I found a really cheap flight.
Yeah.
So of course the cheapest flight to get there, I went via Kuala Lumpur,
Yeah.
and instead of flying into the capital city or something, the cheapest flight was at the top end of the country.
Yeah.
So I then caught buses and
Yeah.
ferries
Yeah.
all the way down to the absolute other end
Yeah.
of the nation. So by the time I got there, I'd been on buses with people with chickens and
Yeah.
all sorts of stuff, and everywhere you stop, people trying to sell you
Hmm.
all sorts of stuff, and I think it took me about 6 days or something to get there, basically non-stop traveling. But by the time I got there, I thought, "Oh, this is such a cool joint."
Yeah.
So, um, but but I haven't been on any sort of bird or conservation trips
Yeah.
yet to the Philippines. So that's the next kind of um, thing lined up for
Yeah.
me, is to go. I've done two shows about the Philippines cockatoo, which is critically
Mhm.
endangered, and the Philippines eagle,
Mm.
which
Mhm.
is slightly less endangered but such a majestic bird.
Yeah. The
So
Philippine eagle was. I remember having being mildly obsessed with it for a few weeks when a few years ago.
yeah,
That's always been on my to see list. That's for
so
sure.
So did you have the harpy eagle thing and then migrate to the Philippines eagle? That's how I got
Absolutely.
to know about it.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
see the
That's
harpy eagle and
yeah.
then you see the Philippine eagle. Yeah.
Yeah. That's
And
absolutely how it went down.
um and so yeah, I've interviewed people. Fantastic work they've been doing with the Philippines cockatoo.
Mm,
So that's where obviously the first place I want to go. Then I want to go to the Philippine Eagles Foundation and have a look at what they're doing and try and get out to some of the locations where they're monitoring wild
mm,
birds, and they do GPS tracking and a whole heap
yeah.
of stuff too. But captive breeding, the Philippines
Hmm.
cockatoo. But then there's these islands that people don't really know about. But the bleeding heart pigeons, they've got bleeding heart pigeons on islands like Sulu and
Hmm.
Mindoro and whatnot. And these birds are down to 20, 30,
Mm.
40 individuals. So yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. So now, critically endangered bird, Robert. What's behind me?
Eastern curlew.
Far eastern curlew,
Far
if
Eastern
you don't
curlew.
mind. Far eastern curlew. Um, Critically endangered, and um, they're about to lose a piece of prime habitat unless something really amazing
Mm,
happens, and that would be a politician saying no to a property developer.
mm.
Let me get the share this screen. I just want people to see what is at risk and why these things happen and how they can slip under the radar. All right, Toondah Harbour. Here we go. Here we go. There we go. Right now, can you see?
It's loading. There we go.
Okay, so that's what we're talking about when we say Toondah Harbour. Now you can see that there's obviously lots of um, lots of housing and everything around the shores of the bay, but there are areas of shallow water and mud flats
Hmm.
and grassy verges and whatnot there. Um, Now, is that one? No, that's not the one I want. Where are we? Sorry, everyone. So, that's what parts of Toondah Harbour look like. Mud flats, some
Mm.
mangroves, and of course, birds use these places, right? And the curlew uses that place. But why is the curlew so amazing? Now, this here is what's proposed. This development here is what's proposed to go on that spot. Um, it's it's just crap, crap. That's my view.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
crap.
Oh, that's basically it's the only real way to sum it up, really.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think I was just not showing everyone what I was trying to show. But these birds, the Forest and Curlew, they breed in Siberia and that eastern side of Russia, and then they migrate all the way down to near us, Rob,
mm,
Western Port Bay.
mhm,
Uh, so that's a massive journey that they undertake, and they feed here. Some of them stop at Darwin. I've done an episode about the the population that winter in Darwin. Now we say winter, it's winter. It's winter time in the northern hemisphere, but they
mm,
come down here for summer and they eat crabs and shellfish and whatnot
mm.
on mud flats. But what always gets developed every time there's uh, an expansion in cities? What do they do, Rob?
It's just destroy the mudflats, rip up the mangroves, and build the buildings next to the water because everyone wants a waterfront view.
That's right. But the far eastern curlew is dwindling in number. But I don't know if you know about the Eskimo curlew, Rob.
Name rings a bell, but I can't for the life of me remember any other details about them.
The Eskimo curlew lived in the Americas, North America, right? And at the time of European colonization, it was super common. It grazed. It was in the prairies and everything.
Yeah,
And like the passenger pigeon,
yeah.
it's gone. And recently, the slender-billed curlew, which is another kind of curlew, that looks like it's been declared extinct. Now, there's the Eurasian curlew from that is familiar in Europe and the western areas of Asia and Central Asia. That they've had huge efforts to try and save that, and it's still with us, and so is the Far Eastern curlew. But 2 out of 5 curlews are basically gone, and they were super common in the Americas, and they were hunted for food early on, but their habitat was just developed. You know, the prairies and whatnot were overrun with cattle and sheep and mowed and grazed by horses and whatnot, which just means the curlews couldn't breed, so they're gone. So what does that mean? There's a petition, and there's the site actforbirds.org.au, where you can sign a petition. But I would ask you also to get active on social media and use that hashtag and basically let the Environment Minister, Tanya Plibersek in Australia, know that you give a shit, that you would like her to use her ministerial powers and stop this development. Rob, on that, on the survey, 54,500 have signed. They're looking for 75,000. That's a change.org petition. So do go and check that one out, which is...
Do we know how long this has been running?
The campaign.
This particular petition, yeah.
This particular petition has... Let's have a good look at it. Where can I find that? Where can I find that? Sign this petition. Where? Okay, it looks like it's been up for over 4 years because this has been on the radar for a long time. I remember.
Right.
So now the Act for Birds ones, let me get that up. Let me get that one up. That's been going for quite a while too. It's coming. Okay, so this is a BirdLife one. Save Toondah Harbour. That's it there. I think this has been up for quite a few years as well. Does it tell me? Doesn't really tell me, I don't think. But the YouTube video, let's watch that.
Eastern curlew, it's a critically endangered bird. It migrates from Alaska and Siberia back to Toondah Harbour. They fly between 9,000 and 11,000 kilometres. They come back, they're skinny, they're exhausted, and they use the time here to fatten up.
The immediate area, it's a feeding area for eastern curlew. If you remove a feeding area, they are not able to put on weight for the long migratory journeys.
And they want to build high-rise apartments.
It must be a no-go area. Developing out onto the mudflats is totally unacceptable.
Well, Toondah Harbour is a very important habitat. It's part of Moreton Bay. The migratory shorebirds actually spend up to 9 months a year here.
These birds feed and live on mudflats.
These birds come back to Australia. They spend more time here than anywhere else. So to say that we're going to put in a large, concrete, glitzy archipelago when that actually means trash a Ramsar site, no, not acceptable.
This is public land and they're giving it to a private developer, taking away something that belongs to all of us.
When Raby Bay was built, within 2 years, 5,000 birds that used to roost near that area had totally gone. They totally disappeared. So for the developers to say that, this is going to have no real impact is not true. The fact is that under national and international law, migratory shorebirds are all protected. The advice was this development is clearly unacceptable, and yet they totally ignore it.
When the minister goes against what the Department of Environment says, there's something to worry about.
Why have an international action plan and yet not do everything in its power to set the example? It will be a national shame if this development is given approval.
Become curious. Discover the amazing natural world that surrounds you, and then become active.
We've been fighting this for a few years now, but we're certainly not giving up.
These areas are important. They're important for birds. They're also important for people. So we need to learn to share the shorelines. We can live and we can have development where nature is a part of that development and is protected.
I've been coming here for 30 years, and it's my most dearest wish that my children and their children will be coming in here for another 50 years, and that they'll see and they'll appreciate what I'm seeing. Eastern curlew, it's critically endangered bird.
Stop. Okay, let's stop the sharing there. Let's be back here. We'll stop the sharing, yeah. So, Rob, you're from Brisbane originally.
Mm-hmm.
Were you familiar with the Toondah Harbour development before you came down to Melbourne?
Look, now that I'm thinking about it, I definitely remember there being some media coverage about it. Perhaps because it's been a few years since I've moved down to Melbourne, that it has sort of creeped to the back of my mind, and it's only been now that the latest reports have been released that it's actually starting to refresh it. But I do know that I spent quite a lot of time in the Redlands area. I've got family in the Redlands area, and it's very clear for anyone who has been there how absolutely critical that habitat is along the shorelines. All of those mudflats and mangrove estuaries are of vital importance to not just migratory shorebirds, absolutely, but not just migratory shorebirds. There's a whole host of biodiversity that depends on them.
Yeah.
We also depend on them for mitigation against storm surges, sea level rise. It's the thought of removing such important habitat is, in my opinion, beyond ludicrous. And so to think that something of this scale has gotten this far in the developmental process is really upsetting.
What I'm obviously a few years older than you, Rob, but years ago, what we used to do in Australia was say, look what they're doing in Korea, and look what they're doing in Japan, and look what they're doing in Vietnam. They're destroying all the mudflats, and all these birds are becoming really, really, really rare. Now, all of that was true, but now the last mudflats left are really, really important, and we've got loads and loads of them, and we can't be that first world country that says, oh well. The argument the developers are putting now, oh, well, the birds have been decreasing anyway, so, what does it matter? We probably can't stop it. Well, bullshit.
That's not...
I call bullshit. But what I say and what I want Australians to understand is you can't be saying, gee, isn't it terrible what China's doing? Oh, China are just doing all these bad things for the environment. No, bullshit. We're doing it in our backyards, and we need to stop. And if you don't get involved, and you don't sign a petition, or you don't go to a protest or whatever, and you say you care, you're just a liar and a fool and a dickhead. That's my view. So.
Yeah. And I'd like to speak to one particular line in that clip, which was a really, really good.
Wasn't it a really good video too?
It was such a good video.
Well done, BirdLife. Really.
Yeah, that was fantastic. But there was I've forgotten who said it, but there was a line that says we can have development that also works with nature and doesn't exclude nature, and that is an absolute fundamental idea in what we call urban ecology that basically challenges this idea that nature is, it's over there in our reserves and national parks. Nature isn't around us. Well, that's simply not true. This is a perfect example of a species that is internationally significant, that lives right on the doorstep and depends on the environment surrounding some pretty built-up areas, and it's a perfect opportunity for conservation where people can see it and for people to get involved.
I did an episode with Scott Persner, who works with BirdLife Taiwan, or Birds Taiwan, I think is the correct group. And we talked about some developments that they have done in Taiwan. Now, Taiwan is hugely developed in a per capita sense compared to Australia. And they rehabilitated some old salt pans and whatnot. Now, they have development. They have shoreline development, but they also are proud of their birds, and they are protecting their birds. And we can easily do it, and birds are adaptable. That's another thing that we know. So once they know that it's safe, even if there are skyscrapers, not Trump Tower kind of skyscrapers, but 4 or 5 story residential units that might be set back a couple of 100 metres, if the birds still have their feeding ground and not being directly impacted by jet skis or fishing boats and whatnot coming really, really close, the birds will keep using these areas. They need somewhere safe to feed, and they need somewhere safe to sleep. And that's what we always forget. They actually they don't sleep where they feed, but they do sleep near to where they feed. And what was it? 6,000 kilometres, I think, was the figure talked about. It's a round trip of 12,000, 15,000 Ks that these birds do, and they do it from their breeding ground to here and then back, and they do that every year.
Yep.
They're amazing birds. So there we go. That's my bit of grumpy grant for the day. So I'm going to leave the tune up. Do use the hashtag and do let the ministers know what you think. What have we got here? Here we go. So I'll just put that one up again. We've got Vanji from the Philippines, and here is Hello, Naomi. It's great to have you back on the show. Naomi gets involved in a lot of the streams, so it's good. Good to see you. You obviously aren't banned, Naomi. You can fill us in on that, because we thought Naomi got banned in the in the last stream. Yeah, sharing's really important. That is really important, and also I want to make it clear that even though Tanya Plibersek gets it is sort of the object of so much of the ire in this conversation, there's also a Queensland Minister for the Environment / Conservation, and the Deputy Premier in Queensland is the Minister for Planning, and they all have the ability to make a big difference here. So I might actually Rob, just talk amongst yourself.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, while you're doing that, I just want to reiterate the importance of just sharing to your own personal circles. I found that is such an important avenue for not just raising awareness, but simple knowledge exchange. You know, I know not everyone who even lives close to these to these areas with significant species like the fire eastern curlew perhaps isn't necessarily aware that they're actually this important and this value, or that they're even present. So just taking the time to share and make sure that you're communicating that is really, really important to making sure that your voices are heard. And so I think that's a really valuable opportunity for each and every one of us to contribute to the conservation of not just the fire eastern curlew, but a whole host of threatened species and ecological communities. It's really, really important. We've seen how grassroots activism can be such a powerful force when it comes to protecting our threatened species. So yeah, I just wanted to take the time to really highlight how valuable a contribution that can be.
Yeah, it's it is really, really important that that you not only look to influence your local ministers, members, and whatnot. Where are we going? I'm just looking here. It's for the Queensland Minister for Environment. Now, this is how they make things really, really difficult. Let me share this again. Let's stop. Now, please take note of these numbers. You can get the Deputy Premier at deputy.premier@ministerial.queensland.gov.au, but that's the Minister's office. I'd also be looking at his electorate office, which is Marumba at parliament.queensland.gov.au, but he's got a website too, stephenmiles.com. So yeah, check him out. But let's also take that one off. And this is how they make it difficult. And stop sharing. Let me get the next one up. Because the Minister for the Environment in Queensland is Megan Scanlon. I think her name is. Here we go. So this is cabinet.queensland.gov.au, and this is contact the minister, right? And guess what they do? That's the only way. On the form, which they will promptly ignore, or may well ignore. But what made me angry about Megan Scanlon, MP, is here we go. We're on the Queensland Cabinet and Ministerial Directory because I'm trying to contact her, of course. And what's the last media statement she put out? New laws to strengthen environmental framework. Now, she's just having a lend of us because we're talking about what they're not doing to protect a critically endangered migratory bird that is protected under international agreements because the shores of Moreton Bay are recognised under what's called the Ramsar Treaty for significant habitat to be protected for shoreline wading birds and whatnot. So Megan Scanlon has made it very difficult from this page. There's no phone numbers, right? There's no mailing number, no mailing address. So I would say don't do this. What we need to do is I'll just stop sharing again while I find it. Tell us about the bay a bit, Moreton Bay, and I will just find this a good contact so that you can find her without having to go through the gatekeepers.
So for your viewers and listeners who perhaps have never been to the area, Moreton Bay is formed predominantly by North and South Stradbroke Island and Moreton Island, which sort of extend out from the coast. And basically, and there's a whole host of other much smaller islands down towards the southern end as well. But the existence of these islands creates this really, really important area that's protected from a lot of the harsher surf conditions that you get from on the eastern side of the islands. And it's a really, really important area for a lot of species, particularly things like dugongs. There's large areas of what do they eat? Seagrass. There we go. Seagrass. Yeah. Seagrass meadows. It's a really important area for a lot of turtle species, as well as particularly along the southern end where you do have that high concentration of islands and mangroves. It's a really important breeding area for a lot of marine fish species. So it's this small cluster of just really, really big importance. And it's also just a really lovely area to visit as well. So I've got family who live on one of those small islands called Coochie Mudlow Island. And so I spent quite a lot of my time around Moreton Bay and exploring mangroves and things like that. And there's just a whole host of things that to see. Another threatened species that some of you may be aware of in the bird community is the bushstone curlew. Now, as a graduate ecologist and someone who has loved birds and loved nature for my entire life, I actually genuinely did not know the bushstone curlew was threatened until a few years ago, purely because they are everywhere in the Redlands. It did not even occur to me that they might be at risk, and they are across the rest of almost their entire range. But it's just such good habitat for them. It's such an important habitat for them that they are thriving. So that's another good example of how important some of these urban areas can be for conservation. But if you do have the opportunity to explore Moreton Bay, even if you're just in the area and haven't been for a while, like I would recommend it. There's some really, really lovely places, natural landscapes to just get out and enjoy nature.
For sure. So, look, here's Megan Scanlon MP on Facebook. And as you can see there, she's the state member for Gavin, the Minister for Environment and Great Barrier Reef, and the Minister for Science. But she's got an email address, gavin@parliament.qld.gov.au, meganscanlon.com.au, and hey, there'll be a trivia night on the 25th of November at the Nerang Bicentennial Community Centre, and she'll be there. So you could probably go and have a word to her, because here she's very proud. No, not that one. Where are we? Somewhere. I'm not going to spend all day going through. Oh, here we go. So she's doing good things, but she's also, overseeing what could be a potential disaster for the Far Eastern Curlew. So there we are. Do you reckon I've made the point enough there, Rob?
I think so. I think so. And I wouldn't necessarily underestimate the significance of just contacting your local MPs either.
Yeah.
Like, I think that there's this misnomer that because, they're such busy individuals and we have this idea that, it won't even get to them. It'll just be filtered by staff.
If you can make contact with the electorate office as well as the ministerial office, be polite, but tell them quite simply. Don't just tell them, I'm worried about the curlews, right? That is not a message that resonates in terms of what action you might take. What you can do is say, if you're someone like me, and this is the communications I've done recently about logging. Hello, I've been a natural pinko lefty Labor supporter all of my life. But what I am now doing is actively making the decision to not support a government that is not working to protect the forest creatures and the trees and the habitat and obviously the birds in our forests. And I will be supporting independent or other candidates and not the ALP. If you tell them that quite clearly, they know that you're not just having a whinge, but you are actually thinking about the actions that you can take that can, one, damage the government or the party, but not necessarily advantage the other side. It's stupid to just support the side which is going to be worse, right? But what you can do is make sure, for instance, balance of power. If they have to negotiate with people whose number one issue is conservation, well, then it's a lot harder to ignore conservation. So,
and that's exactly right. And also just backing up your values and opinions with science and knowledge gives that argument just so much more power. And the more people that we get who can make these correspondence and get in touch really just hones in on what actually is valued by the community.
Yeah, and what I'm encouraging people to do, Rob, is that politics in Australia has been really tribal. I'm sure it's the same everywhere. Like, just look at what you see in America, where everyone, you're either a libtard Dem or you're a GOP conservative. That's a stupid way to look at things. What you need to do is be strategic, and sometimes the side that you might want to support is doing a bad thing. And forestry in Australia is a classic example of where neither side tends to do anything really good, and they manage the dissent. So what you've got to do is be able to cut through the rubbish and really get involved and let people know that the issue is important enough for you to change your vote. Because a lot of people will go, well, look, no one's going to vote against us because we're always better on hospitals or public transport or whatever. But what you need to do is say, no, this time, I might make a change. So yeah, get get involved, get informed, and make a difference. There's plenty of information out there. If you're on Twitter and you use hashtag Toonda, like I've got there, you'll find out a lot about this development and why it is so important. So,
And if you ever are unsure of where to even start, or when it comes to sifting through information, there's so many really good conservation organizations out there, like BirdLife Australia, where that you can use as resources and opportunities to enhance your argument, or and so don't be afraid to reach out to those sorts of communities as well, if you are unsure of where to begin.
yeah, obviously, BirdLife put together that terrific video, and that actforbirds.org.au is a BirdLife site, right, with their priority campaigns. So yeah, check it out and get involved. But it's really important that sharing on social media happens, and
Absolutely.
that you help amplify the messages that people are trying to get out there. Now, Rob, did you know, speaking of BirdLife, did you know that tomorrow marks the start of Bird Week for Australia?
I did, and I'm very excited about that. I sort of missed it last year, so I didn't. But yeah, no, I'm very excited to do some backyard bird surveys again. It's a great way to just contribute to some science, as well as just to connect with the stuff that's running around or flying around in your backyard. So definitely an exciting time of the year.
That's right. And I'll be speaking with Holly again tomorrow. We've got Monday with Holly is back. She's but if you want to get involved in the Aussie Bird Count for this year, marking the start of Bird Week, that's where you go. AussieBirdCount.org.au. Get the mobile app, and you can do the count. 20 minutes every day. Go to the same spot if you can at the same time, and just mark down what you saw. And if you aren't a bird nerd, if you're new to bird watching and noticing what's around you, and that's what I'm all about, noticing what's around you, there's a lot of tips and ID tips and calls and whatnot in the app that help you work out what it is that you are seeing. And hey, let me give a plug, Rob. Do you know about this?
I certainly do know about that.
Okay, well, that's my little effort where I get out every morning and just report the first bird I heard and the first bird I saw. And this morning, when I was out there, the long-billed Corella followed me around as I was walking around doing a little thing.
Nice.
So he made a starring role. So I'm doing that on most of the socials, on YouTube Short. It goes out on Instagram, Facebook, and I do a little video for Twitter. They're all a little bit different, but yeah. And the idea behind it is just to encourage people to notice what's around them. Because sometimes we don't, do we? Sometimes, Rob, we just don't.
Exactly. And I'm not going to lie, I was guilty of that this morning. It took my brain a little while to wake up after my first coffee. So I unfortunately can't even remember what my first seen and heard was, at least for a few hours. So it's something that it does take. Sometimes it has to be like that conscious decision, but it can be such a rewarding experience just to stop and take the time to notice what's around you, because you can really be surprised. I'm constantly surprised about what's just flying around in my backyard some days.
Well, tell us, Rob, what have you seen that's been quite significant in your backyard? Actually, and tell us about Brisbane too. Tell us what you used to see where you were living in Brisbane.
So I think my favorites every year is always going to be it's always going to be the gangs and the yellow-tailed black cockatoos that fly over occasionally in Sunbury, and that's normally around late May to about July, depending on the year. We've had a few months ago, we had a virtual army of little corellas descend onto Sunbury and wreak absolute hilarity, which was really, really fun to see. I'm yet to see the swift parrots that flock up from Tasmania every year, but there's quite a lot around my area, so I am lucky. In Brisbane, I spent a lot of time I went to Griffith Nathan, which is, for those of you who aren't aware, is right smack bang in the middle of Toohey Forest, just off the M1 on the south side of...
Yeah, off the freeway, just down the road from Green Slopes.
Yeah. And it's very much almost this sort of island of it's a decent patch of forest, and if you walk right down into the middle, there was always a few families of variegated fairy wrens that I can remember a lot of times where I was almost late to classes because I was just watching the fairy wrens flit amongst the Pultoneas. But you'd sort of go through, you'd have the usual culprits like the rainbow lorikeets, noisy miners, blue-faced honeyeaters, the really urban abundant species. So you'd see a lot of those. And every now and again, you'd get a few less common things popping up. So we'd get pale-headed rosellas, which I've just learned a new fact within the last month, that pale-headed rosellas in some parts are called custard heads.
Yes.
And I love that. I've never heard that before, and every time I see one, it makes me giggle.
That's come out of the bird keeping. Aviculturists.
Yeah,
who
I
always
love it.
come up with cool names.
So we would have every year around this sort of time of year, we'd often have a pair of pale-headed rosellas that must have been breeding somewhere nearby. We never found where exactly, but every now and again we'd just hear their little chirps, and we knew they were back for the year. And then we'd get things like pheasant cuckoos and Australasian fig birds popping up occasionally. So there is definitely quite a large diversity of birds around the Brisbane area as well. So you're in a pretty good spot for any of your Brisbane listeners to do some good birding. That's for sure.
I just reached for my Australian Bird Guide, opened up on the rosellas by chance.
Nice.
And I was just checking because I couldn't remember whether... Sorry, there we go. Don't be so unprofessional. Getting the mic. Grant.
Come on, Grant.
I was just checking whether we were talking about two species or a bunch of species for the rosellas, but we're talking about a bunch of species again. Pale-headed afforded species status. That argument tends to go up and down year after year, doesn't it? Are we talking about white-cheeked rosellas and blue-cheeked rosellas, or are we talking about all the different species? Rob, just want to when I leaned over to get that book, I just want to feature this book because we're talking about just noticing what's out and about in your neighbourhood. I got sent this by the Urban Field Gnats Project, which people will be aware of the wing tags, or the bush chooks, bin chickens.
Yep.
So John has been involved in all of that, but the gang put this together is a terrific little guide if you are looking for some inspiration to notice what's about you just in your neighbourhood. get this for Christmas.
I've
Terrific
also,
book.
if you struggle to, or if you're just out and about on your normal day to day and you don't have a good bird ID book out on hand with you, I've found that the Merlin Bird ID app is also another really, really good ID app that you can download, especially if you're not necessarily an avid bird watcher. You know, you can go through just basic descriptions of the bird. You know, how big was it? What were the colors? Where did you see it? And it actually spits out a list of potential options that you can then use to try and hone it down. So for anyone new who's starting out to bird watching, that's one that I recommend as well.
Yep, and I will also plug again, because I've done it a million times, but the one that I'm using, I can't really bring the app up. Let's see if you can get a good look at this. You're looking for a regent bowerbird on the front. Do you see?
Yes.
Do you see that?
Yes. That's
just that's the icon for the iPhone, and it's on both platforms. But it has bird calls, and you can search by area as well as by family and by common name and whatnot.
Great distribution maps as well.
Naomi gives you a vote there on the Merlin ID. Also, iNaturalist is also terrific too. But yeah, Merlin is super cool. Naomi, how's things going in your neck of the woods? Naomi's been looking for a Rob. I should have prefaced this by Naomi. Rob was working in nurseries before he came down to Melbourne, so we've got two horticulture brains here as well. Naomi's in the Central Highlands in New South Wales, so that Jimmy Barnes kind of area, you know. And was looking for a plant to grow under Angophora, a big Angophora tree, in relatively heavy shade. Now, I've already given Naomi my recommendation, and we didn't stick to it had to be native or indigenous.
Okay.
I pushed it out a little bit further. So I've already given Naomi a couple of ideas. What would you suggest, Rob?
Is this an area? I don't know the area. Is this an area that gets lots of frost?
Well, it's under a tree, so it's not going to be affected by frost. I'll wait until you give your recommendation. Yeah. Naomi has acted on my recommendation. She's just let us know.
So one of the, while I'm thinking of natives, we used to get what's called a graptophyllum, or a native holly fuchsia, I believe is one of the common names.
Yes,
I'm not 100% sure how well it will go in that region of the world. It is a native to around the Yungala region. And that's a really, really good plant for low light areas that'll still be bird attracting. But if you're going non-natives, then I guess it depends on how tall you're wanting it to get. But you could, I've seen even things like even just your standard camellias will be pretty good for honey eaters and things like that. So that's always another one option, as well as pollinators.
Do you want me to put you out of your misery?
Yeah, what have you recommended? Oh, Clivias. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Absolutely. Yep. They'll go nuts.
So, we didn't, I didn't talk about, I didn't sort of want, well, it would have been great to go indigenous, and we did talk about Dianellas and Lamandras and whatnot, but because Naomi's got a it's not a wild garden. It's so it fits into that fairly. It can be used in a formal garden. And then the more I thought about it, there's all these things like the little berberuses and things like that too that would have been great. But the Clivia lets the nice and clumping.
Yeah.
Handles a light frost.
Yep.
Will handle the snails and will give all the honey eaters something to get into as well. So
Absolutely. As well as being some nice little habitat for skinks or potentially
that
some frogs and insects, and all of those clumping plants are really, really great.
how good's that, Naomi? Didn't I say the blue tongues and whatnot will find somewhere to hang out? And actually, even like you'll find the scrub wrens and whatnot will get in amongst and tussock hop and get under
Absolutely.
under them looking for slaters and woodlice and anything else that are in there, earwigs. So yeah, well there we go. I'm glad you agreed on that one, Rob. What I was keen to get your thoughts too, Rob, having been someone who's moved from Brisbane, from subtropical into Melbourne, and fairly culturally quite distinct, even though we're in the same country. There are often, I don't want that there. I'm removing it. I want it to actually get out of the. I want it to get out of the whole stream. Doesn't matter. What before you moved? What was your biggest sort of concern in conservation? And now that you're down here, has it shifted? Have you got a different kind of priority?
That's an interesting question. I think I think my biggest concern, or at least the one that I was most actively aware of, was things like loss of habitat from deforestation and urbanization. I think being from Brisbane, most of the natural landscape is primarily forested of varying descriptions. So I think the big adjustment for me moving down was shifting that to grasslands. Grasslands are not necessarily something that I'd really been exposed to being from Southeast Queensland. And so a lot of the time when I'm looking out at, a landscape, before I moved down rather, it was, if it had lots of trees, then my first reaction would be, look at that great habitat, or look, I'm glad that there's still some habitat around. And if I looked out and saw, for instance, just a cleared, an open paddock, it was sort of the other extreme, is, that's all been cleared. So to come down to Melbourne and live in, roughly the western suburbs where we are on the volcanic plains, it took a sort of a shift in my thinking that trees doesn't necessarily equal good habitat, and that the way that we go about, defining what that good habitat is really needs to be dependent, because it's, normally, like tree planting days, for instance, are great and you feel really good about it. But if we're tree planting in an area that historically doesn't have trees, that's not, it's sort of defeating the purpose. And so there was that shift in what sort of constituted good or bad habitat, just even close to the city, just based on the historical landscape and vegetation community. I thought that was a really interesting thing that I didn't necessarily expect to happen moving down.
I lived in Brisbane for a while, and also lived further up the coast, and then did my horticulture placement in Townsville. And one thing that I was struck by, because I had family who lived in other parts of Australia, and I'd frequently driven from Melbourne to Queensland through central and western New South Wales through the Riverina, and then coming into Queensland over Cunningham's Gap. What I was surprised about when I lived in Brisbane is how few people in Brisbane really knew much about what was westward Cunningham's Gap.
Yeah.
And that they really were well acquainted with the coastal areas, you know, the Gold Coast, Brisbane, Sunshine Coast, moving up to, you know, Hervey Bay, you know, getting a little bit further, and then maybe they've had holidays up Cairns, you know.
Yeah.
So they and they knew about the Whitsundays, but Blackhall, you know, Blackwater, Dalby, St George,
Emerald,
Charters Towers, Emerald, Longreach. Queenslanders were pretty much, you know, it's anecdotal, of course, but people were far more familiar with Blue Marlin at Cairns than they were about what was happening at Dalby or Longreach or whatever, which surprised me a little bit, because when people from down south want to do a road trip, they want to go through these places. But I guess in Queenslanders, the whole boat lifestyle, fishing lifestyle locks them as much to the coast as anywhere else. So when you were a youngster, did you have any idea how different St George was, or, you know, Longreach, Charters Towers were, or the Channel Country, you know, was to the rest of eastern Queensland?
I had a little bit of exposure. So we would my school had sporting competition with other schools in the region, and one of them was Scots in Warwick. So we would occasionally drive out to Warwick to play school sport. And my mum actually grew up in Dalby. Okay. So we did go out on a few trips just for the day, mostly to see a family friend who still lives there. But honestly, for the most part, it probably did take a while for me to go much further. I still don't think I've been to places like St George or Charters, like far west. So honestly, I can absolutely see what you mean. Most of my life was spent revolving around, you know, the coastline. A lot of my family lived in Mackay, which is again another coastal city up sort of central Queensland, which is where my parents live now. And if we went on a couple of family holidays to Barham Heads, just outside Hervey Bay. So again, the coastline. So I absolutely agree with you that perhaps particularly Southeast Queenslanders, there is this I don't know, reliance isn't the right word, but yeah, I think a lot of most people's experiences of other parts of Queensland does tend to revolve around the coastline, and there is such a dramatic change in, you know, different landscape types and ecological communities, pretty much in terms of Southeast Queensland, once you get past the Great Dividing Range, so past Toowoomba. But even before that, as you head up, there's such a dramatic change of landscape that I think a lot of people just don't really get to experience.
Now, can you see my cursor there?
I can, yeah.
Around? Okay. So what we were talking about, this is for people who don't know, there's Brisbane, and we were just talking about St George. St George is here, right? Look how big it is, right? And the Great Dividing Range goes down here. So there's an awful lot of Queensland which people just sort of don't see, don't venture into. It's massive, but
yeah.
Yeah, there we go. So I just wanted to put that in context, because it's such a big place.
Yeah. And there are some pretty spectacular places to see. Carnarvon Gorge is a particularly good one, and I've heard it's I went as part of a school camp, so at that point wasn't exactly an avid birder, or at the very least wasn't able to just go and do some bird watching. But it's supposed to be a really, really great spot for just to do some birding or even some spotlighting, and apparently there's some pretty cool things to do out there. But there's so many really fascinating places scattered around.
You mentioned Ungula. I think that's the right pronunciation. Yeah, which is inland of Mackay. I think it's sort of the nearest place. When I did my first road trip up there, I wanted to go to Ungula to get to tick off the Ungula honeyeater, which I never found. But I stopped off at a place there on the way. I stopped off and then I took a little drive. Did you ever notice a place called The Leap on the way up there?
It's, to tell you the truth, it's been a long time since I've been up on that range. I think I was probably maybe...
It's quite a way south, but it's where do you know a place on the coast called Seaforth?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So it's where you turn off to go to Seaforth.
Yeah.
And there's this escarpment up there, but there's this really bizarre little pub there, and
okay.
And I had such a good time at The Leap and Seaforth, and just checking out those little tracks, driving in and finding hidden little gems. And it's not like a tourist joint or anything anywhere.
No, but it's usually just the locals who know about it.
But it just gives an idea of, if The Leap and Seaforth was in Victoria, it would be like Torquay or Lorne. Everyone would talk about it, but it's just, just another little shitty place on the coast.
Yeah.
The coast is so big, so long, but magnificent. I want to jump to something else, Rob, because I mentioned that you'd been working in nurseries, and so you're not a horticulturist per se, but you've always, but you're into plants and horticulture. So, if I asked you to recommend, I was going to get you to head down to the Naomi of Brisbane.
Mm-hmm.
So hello Naomi. I've just transplanted you 1,000 k's up to Brisbane from the Central Highlands. But if I told you I would give you an unlimited budget, but you can only buy 5 species of plants for a garden in Brisbane. Okay. Can you pick 5 plants?
Okay. Oh. That's going to be a tough one.
All right, let me guide you. Up a story, tallish tree.
Yep. Okay. I am a particularly big fan of Buckinghamia. You might know it as ivory curl. It's related to brevilleas within the Proteaceae family, and it gets these really, really spectacular blooms of white flowers, which are absolutely adored by a whole host of birds, but as well,
reminds me of mahonias. If you're thinking of cottage gardens, old world gardens, a bit like the mahonia.
Yeah. So. I always used to, I remember chasing after Christmas beetles that would come for the flowers in the middle of summer, and they would have just this really lovely, slightly sweet fragrance whenever there was a wind, a light breeze.
Yeah, that's sort of their the thing that pushes them past a lot of. I call Buckinghamia a big shrub, like a large shrub, rather than a tree. But the scented flower. Can I tell you what my tree would be?
Yeah.
Eucalyptus tesseraris.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Because it's got that amazing. It's got a really great upright form.
Yeah.
But that really beautiful bark.
Yeah.
That like a bit. Look, it's not a lot like a cork tree, but it's a bit like a cork tree. But it has has that chunky.
They've got some really interesting bark. They can be a nice feature, that's for sure.
Yeah. So if we said that and we said the Buckinghamia, that takes care of the large shrub.
Mm-hmm.
Ground cover.
Ground cover.
Pick a ground cover.
Okay. If you've got a nice sunny spots, scavolas are always a good option. Or fan flowers, as
is there a particular one you would pick? Like, would you go Amula, or have you got a different one that you?
To be perfectly honest, now I'm confusing the species names.
Yeah, well,
it's been a while.
I'm guessing you go for a blue one rather than the mauve one.
Yeah. Generally, my big one of the big reasons that I like scavolas is, yes, the flowers are pretty, but they're also a really valuable host plant for a few butterfly species.
Yeah, that's
why I've always I liked them until I learnt that, and then I remember that was one of my selling points for them when I was in the nurseries and I was selling scavolas was butterfly attracted gardens.
I used to push scavolas because they are they're not rampant, but they're a beautiful plant to have as a fall over of a container or over a retaining wall. They whereas they're not as rampant as the Myoporum parvifolia, which is my other go-to.
Yes, Myoporum is it's another good one, and it's a lot more common down here than things like the scavolas are. But you're right. It's much more rampant. You need more space.
And that's always the other thing. Like I've been working on, Rob. I'm about to launch a habitat gardening YouTube and whatnot, and working on some lists that we can share and work through. But whenever you go through these exercises, and we're only through 3 plants so far out of the 5, you've got to bear in mind what's actually available. There's no point recommending stuff that people can't get. So scavolas are pretty much available all over through the nursery trade, but they will be different varieties in different parts of
and these days you get a lot of hybrids as well. That are bred to have particularly large flowers and things like that.
Yeah, or just selected out, just variants that have been selected out.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we've got a ground cover, we've got a big tree, which I've gone. We've got a large shrub, so that means we have to go for a medium shrub and a small shrub. And I'm going to kick it out. I'm going to put a 6th one in because you can never stop. But I'll get to that one in the end. What would you select for Brisbane as a small shrub? And by small shrub, I'm thinking the size of a football up to maybe a metre and a bit, you know?
Okay.
This would be interesting because this is outside of my specialist knowledge for Brisbane.
Yeah. Most of the shrubs that are springing to mind at the moment get up to around about the 2 metre mark.
Okay, well, throw one in.
So we've got things like Hovia longifolia.
Okay, good one, Hovia. Yeah, I'll give you a tick for that.
Yeah. That gets really. I've got a particular soft spot for it. Really, really lovely sprays of purple flowers in normally late winter, early spring.
And if you're not a plant person, we're thinking a small shrub, but with a pea flower that
Yeah.
looks like the Hardenbergers.
Yes.
It's a purpley
Yes.
pea flower that looks like those happy wanderers
Yeah.
that you will have seen everywhere. That's a really good pick.
Yeah.
I would probably have gone for Hybertia or Hybertia,
Yeah.
depending on who you.
Yes. Of
I-
course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just because I like to go something different. All right, so that means we have to go for a large shrub,
Okay.
and this is where there are so many Australian plants available. I'll be interested to see whether your brain goes the same way mine does when I'm thinking about
Okay.
Brisbane. So this is something that might be, above hip height up to sort of head height, for a person, because we've got the Buckinghamia is just that slightly little bit bigger.
That little bit of extra height. Yeah. Alrighty.
And I'm actually not sure which species I would pick, but I know the genus I would pick.
Okay. All right. So the only one that's popping up into my head is another pea, and it's oh god, now I can't even remember the genus. I said it
Persunia?
before.
Was it
No.
Persunia?
That's a good one.
Yeah.
No, I was
Or Platylobium?
another good. No, what am I thinking of? Gets yellow flowers. Pultonea.
Oh,
Pultonea
Pultonea.
velosa.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Pultonea. That bacon and egg flowers, that
Yes.
orangey red or
Yeah.
red and brown flowers. Yeah.
Yeah.
That would have been a good one. Yeah. I was going a Persunia because
Yeah.
of the
Okay.
I would have gone for one of the needle foliage ones. Persunias generally have yellow flowered flowers and look yellow coloured flowers and look like Grevilleas and Banksia individual flowers because they're related to Grevilleas and Banksias. So yeah, got that. So yeah, well we were pretty much along the same line. Now there's a category we didn't put in, and so we have to go to 6.
Yeah.
Tufting. So a grass
Yeah.
or a lily or something like that. What would you pick?
I think in a lot of ways, and these are plants that I often would scoff at in the first few years that I was in nurseries. But I've recently come to appreciate a lot more, and it's the humble Dianella.
Yeah.
They're just versatile plants. You've got great pollinator attractants, great tussock, clumping plants for little reptiles and frogs and inverts and things like that. They are a really reliable plant, as well as being pretty versatile in terms of what they're attracting.
So, which is the Dianella that you would recommend in Brisbane? I'm familiar with, apart from all the cultivars and whatnot.
Yeah.
But, Tasmanicus and Longifolia.
Yeah.
Are the common ones that you would recommend Melbourne and Sydney? What would you?
Yes. I'm actually drawing a blank on which are the native ones for that area. Being in a retail nurseries, it was generally speaking the cultivars that I was dealing with, and they were Tasmanica and predominantly.
Let's see, Revoluta perhaps as well up there.
Yeah, that's sounding familiar.
Yeah. I'm just having a look at what gets the tropical and subtropical or intermedia. They're the two. I don't actually know what's in the trade up there, but Dianellas are great. I mean, especially for native insects.
For sure, absolutely.
Blooming marvellous. Okay, well let's we're getting almost to the end of Sunday session time. I've got to the bottom of my coffee. Let's just give people a chance now to sort of throw it open. Have you had a new appreciation of the gardens and the sort of streetscapes and whatnot in Melbourne than you had before you moved down here? Like, has your perception of Melbourne changed as a Queenslander?
I'm going to say yes. I have always been a fan of the cottage garden aesthetic. I really, really loved the notion of seasonal change in what is and isn't blooming in the garden. You know, a lot of gardens in Brisbane are, you know, subtropical, and so there's much less seasonality to them. But I think what I have started to see and get really, really excited about is the use of native plants to build up that stereotypical cottage garden look. You know, most people will think of salvias and lavender, which, by the way, I absolutely adore. But to see things starting to turn around, and there's quite a few really, really good initiatives put out by the City of Melbourne, and a few other groups as well to improve the biodiversity of streetscapes. Seeing things like brachyscomes, which are cutleaf daisies, and chrysocephalums, billy buttons, all of these really lovely native wildflowers, which in a lot of way could be used as native equivalents to your standard daffodils and things like that. That's been really, really nice to see.
There's nearly always an alternative
absolutely
when you talk about native plants, and then when you push it a bit further with indigenous plants, there's nearly always one you can find that will do the job. The challenge is, can you actually find it when you need it? Can you buy it when you need it in the quantities that you need? So
that can be tricky. I mean, there are, thankfully in Melbourne, I know there's plenty of options that you can go for. You know, we've got Conservation Collective and Melton Botanic Gardens, and there's lots and lots of local indigenous specialist nurseries. Brisbane, I don't know of as many, to be perfectly honest.
Not as big a network, I don't think, and certainly in other parts of the country, like the Melbourne Indigenous flora and fauna scene has been really healthy for a long time, but Queensland's so big that the regionalisation is also a problem, in that if you want to go and talk to somebody, you might need to drive for 5 hours, right? Whereas in Melbourne, you might be able to just jump on the tram. You know? So that's one of the disadvantages of distance, and plus so many different communities, vegetation communities, in Queensland. We have the same thing here, where so many of them are gone, but that sort of Seed Savers network and the land care groups and whatnot have built up some stores.
And sometimes those land care groups or the native plant societies can be really good sources of information.
Definitely.
So they can be, if you are trying and struggling to track down some of those native equivalents, then it can be really advantageous to actually get in touch. If even if they themselves can't provide you with them, they can probably point you in the right direction.
Naomi's just noted that Diggers seeds are good. Now, Diggers seeds are really great for heritage varieties of whatnot. Eden seeds also the same. Seed Savers are terrific, but there are plenty of volunteer groups and specialist nurseries that are involved in trying to do this, and also propagating, not necessarily seeds, but propagating. So that's kind of where my new thing will be heading. But while I'm an Indigenous proponent, as much as possible, I also think that sometimes you can't beat a salvia, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
sometimes the jasmine will be the thing that you want to use, and I'm hoping to encourage people to think that maybe you want something that will establish really well, really quickly, but that you can remove it as something else establishes behind it, and that's where I think jasmines and whatnot are great. Now Naomi's got a question for you, Rob. So
Yes,
Naomi, you certainly can. So you're wanting to get a sort of status report on red rumpery. Is that, have I got that right, or do you want Rob to talk about his study generally, Naomi? You'll have to clarify for us. I'm thinking it's probably about where are you at with red rumpery. So let's start with that, and Naomi can tell us if we need to go any further.
So some of you who are tuning in might have tuned in a few weeks ago when I was on talking a little bit more about red rumpery, and it's, as in a nutshell, it's essentially a citizen science project that my supervisor and I created as a way of essentially combating the lockdowns. I am just about to finish off a master environment at the University of Melbourne. So I was in the middle of all of my my data collection and was struggling to navigate when I could actually go out and survey and figure out where the red rumps were nesting and what trees they were nesting in, and that all of that really important information. And so we decided to turn to the public and draw on the public knowledge, and created this citizen science project as a way of just strengthening the amount of data that we could collect in a short time period, and also over a larger geographic area. And I've since finished my master's research, but my thesis at least, and we're now extending red rumpery into a second season. So because of timing, I didn't have the opportunity to release red rumpery into the world during the main breeding season, and so we thought, we're in breeding season now. This is a great opportunity to run it again, and hopefully get some new observations from this season. So we're really wanting to just build on the data that we've already got before we sort of look at future publications and stuff, and just seeing how the red rumps are going for the breeding season.
Now, I encourage you to check out the birdemergency.com/red rumps, because that's where the red rumpery interview is, and also the links to go and check it out, and lots of great photos of the red rump parrots, so you can get an idea of what we're talking about if you don't actually know. Now, Rob, you were talking about we. Now, we, who's the we?
Yes. So when I say we, and I probably should have explained this a while ago, but I'm working with the fantastic Dr. Kylie Soanes, who has been on the Bird Emergency before. She's got a bunch of different projects. She's predominantly an urban ecologist, and so my research is working within these urban spaces, but I'm also working quite closely with the city of Melbourne as well. They're really, really interested in improving the habitat available within the city. So it's very much a joint effort and joint collaboration.
Rob, Kylie might kill me for recounting this story, but
oh yeah,
I want to know. I want to know whether it happened to you. When I was going back and forth, as you do before you're preparing for an interview and you're trying to do a bit of research and digging into the bios and whatnot. Kylie, has Kylie ever mentioned to you, or did it happen to you? Did you, have you ever found Kylie being mixed up with someone else online?
No. Well, okay, so I have another academic called Kylie Cairns that I know quite well. So in my head, I occasionally will accidentally mix them up, depending on what topic I'm talking about. But are we? I'm assuming that's not what you meant.
I'm not. I'm just going to. She's going to kill me for this, no doubt. But this is what happened to me. Where are we? So,
That's brilliant.
so that was Kylie Soanes, the drummer from the amazing Legs Electric. Oh, I better hang on. This is their. Did I stop the sharing?
Yes, you did.
I'll probably get a copyright strike, but
Keep your head on and don't lose it. Eyes wide shut, the urge climbing.
Oh, that's great.
So
That's amazing.
let
Maybe
me.
she just lives a double life.
Well, before I dug right into it, and I'd just seen these shots, and they were all sort of 8-9 year old or longer clips.
Mm-hmm.
And there's, when you're in a band or whatever and you're in that scene, you dye your hair and everything.
Yeah.
And I couldn't actually see who it was. So I just sent Kylie this message. I said, Kylie, were you ever in a band? And she said, no. And I went, oh, well, you got to check this out. So there we are. So Google scholar Kylie Soanes is not the drummer from Legs Electric from Perth in WA. But there you go. I had to clarify with Kylie that it wasn't because I thought, how cool is this? We've got this really cool, urban ecologist who's into bird nerd, the cutting edge of artificial hollows and everything, and a rock pig, So there we go. She'll probably never speak to me again now, having put that out. But I just wondered whether when you were researching, who will I be working with or whatever, and you.
I mean,
just,
I did.
Yeah.
As you do, because I when I was starting off I started my masters, and I knew I needed a research project, and so I was doing the humble uni student being like, hello, I exist.
Yeah.
Please work with me.
Yeah.
And so, you do background reading, but it's not, that connection definitely doesn't come up on the academic page. Melbourne Uni haven't linked to it. No. So I've never known that. That's amazing.
But the reason I thought it was plausible was in my earlier days, I actually did some work with bands and whatnot, and I know some people who are in bands who are now, leading scientists and influential people in all sorts of trades. And I thought, so it's not
that
totally implausible. And because I couldn't see closely enough, because, the drummer's way back there and all the lights are on, and I thought, well, maybe Kylie did dye her hair, white and whatnot. Because I did actually see that the one of the I think either an immunologist or a dietitian that I saw on an interview recently was actually the girlfriend of someone that I knew in bands recently. Is now I don't think it's professor, but certainly doctor, somewhere or other. And I was thinking, wow, So it wasn't implausible, but yeah.
Maybe she's just wearing a wig.
Well, you just never know. But I mean, hey, and over the course of 10 or 15 years, we can all start to look a bit different, especially if you're in a band when you're 21 or something, and then you can look quite different after a little while. So there we go. So
that's phenomenal.
I got to give Kylie some real kudos here too, because she's really driving a lot of significant projects now that are making a big difference. And of course, I spoke to her about artificial hollows in the urban landscape, but the superb city wrens. I'm sure Rumpuary, with the two of you continuing to push that, will it'll probably be important for birds other than the red rumps, because pardalotes share the similar size hollows, especially in branches rather than in trunk hollows.
And that's we did always know that going into it, and the only real reason that we focused in on just that one species was because a master's research project.
That's right. You have to, don't you?
Very,
have to
very
define
time
it.
limited, and it was. I remember there being a few meetings in early on where me being the excited student had all of these ideas and all.
What do you want to study? I want to study this. And whereas and you can do that.
Kylie had to draw me back in from out of the rabbit warren before we went too far. So it was a really great example of a species that you don't necessarily see as often, but the same information is really valuable for a whole host of others, not even just birds. You can apply it to things like microbats and a whole range of other of hollow users in the urban landscape, and
moths, all kinds of insects,
for sure, absolutely. So there's a huge amount of value in it outside of the red rumps.
Definitely. Rob, we're just about up, but we're talking tomorrow with Holly, I mentioned earlier, but more hollow nesting birds, and a bird we have come back to time and time again on the Bird Emergency. But we're speaking with Dr. Nick and Lucy, who if you check out hashtag POWL, Powerful Owl, POWL, you'll see lots of their fantastic photography, and the family, the group of Powerful Owls in Brisbane that they've been getting acquainted with over a couple of years. So Dr. Nick and Lucy are joining Holly and I tomorrow to talk Powerful Owls, urban Powerful Owls. And
that'll be great. That'll be absolutely a great episode to tune in for, that's for sure.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see what the similarities have been with the Powerful Owls that we discussed with Bronwyn Isaac, with the work she did in Melbourne. So, yeah, that should be great. And Nick sent me through a couple of cool pictures that I threw up on Twitter earlier on. One of them, he said, I agree with him. American Gothic vibes. So I'll share that a bit more on.
Yes.
On
I can't wait to see it.
did you see it? No, you didn't
I
see it
did.
earlier on today.
I've been a little bit out of the social media world the last couple of weeks just because of being away. So I missed it, unfortunately. I'll have to go back and try and find it because that sounds amazing.
So and there's a really gruesome pic that they showed of a cockatoo chick that one of the owls had actually pulled out of a hollow, nesting hollow. Pretty gruesome, but they're really interesting critters. All right, Rob, let's just ask. We've got people on all the platforms, so Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook. If anyone's got a last question or comment, or I'm even happy if you give us some homework to do. You can give me homework to do. You can't give Rob homework to do because he's got more than enough of his own to do already. And we'll check it out. I think, Anything you'd like me to chase down for a Sunday session again? Actually, this is a bit of a test run. Do you like the looser format, the wide ranging discovery? How much preparation did we do for this, Rob?
I wrote down 4 sentences about 5 minutes before.
I was going to say, that's 4 sentences more than I did. I sent you a tweet saying, "Are you right?" in about an hour. That was my preparation today.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
usually I get around to do a thumbnail or something, and but I haven't decided the style for this. So we'll be guided by what the audience think. And Rob, you've got a standing invitation for the Sunday session. Look, as Naomi gave us the idea. Oh, look, I love when Naomi participates. She always tells us what's what. Naomi, because you're always someone in the comments who always says something, tells us. Do you want sort of issues stuff, or do you want to know more about the guests, or do you want to know more about issues? Because that's where I'm kind of at. Which way do we go? Because I want to, get the bird emergency tied back to species and projects, but all these people have got a lot to say, a lot to contribute, a lot of experience, and it's the stuff that we don't get in the 3-minute grab on, or the little social media vids or whatever everyone always does. So yeah, we value long form content on the bird emergency, but I'm really happy to be guided and pushed in the direction that people would like me to go. You've had 2 shows, Rob. You almost get
Feeling very special.
Well, it used to be two shows got you to be called friend of the show, but I think you have to get into 3 now because I've got a few people who get onto that, so you'll have to get another
I'll
one.
send you my availability.
Yeah, that's right. Share the calendar. All right.
Yeah.
So any other comments? Any other questions? I'll just ask for a wrap up there. It looks like I'm getting access to one of the community features on YouTube a little bit earlier for the bird emergency, and hopefully for habitat gardening with Grant. So we'll be heading up there. I knew I could count on Naomi. Yeah. Oh, good. I'm glad you like the loose format, Naomi, because I can do loose. Don't worry about that. I can do loose. Naomi, did you like the legs electric? Do you like how we squeezed a bit of rock and roll into Sunday environment talk? Who's given us that? Oh, there we go. Facebook love. That was Naomi. I always like it when Naomi gives us a bit of Facebook love. Yeah, that was good. So, Rob, I don't know if Kylie will ever watch this, but you'll be able to ask her.
I'll make sure to bring it up next time I catch
say,
up with her.
You just say, do you play the drums?
Yeah.
You don't have to. You can just get her thinking a little bit. So yeah. Oh, all right. Well, let's wrap that up. Don't forget. Let me just get this one. Where are we? Use that. Share that if you want to help out the Eastern Curlew, Far Eastern Curlew. I'm Grant from the Bird Emergency. Rob Ashworth from Rumproo. I'll get it right one day. Cheers, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Thanks, Naomi, for commenting, and everyone else who is watching on all the platforms. Sunday sessions out.
Thanks, everyone.